The lamp burns low in the corner, its golden glow trembling as if it too is growing old. Shadows sway across the walls, soft and hesitant, like memories that cannot decide whether to stay or fade. The room is small, just 4 walls, a single window, a chair, and a clock that ticks with foolish optimism. But tonight it feels vast, like a stage waiting for a story to be told. I sit with my hands folded on my lap. These hands, they are no longer mine in the way they once were. They belong to time now. The skin is thin, almost translucent, stretched delicately over bones that have carried more than their share. The veins rise like stubborn rivers, refusing to disappear, their blue-green paths wandering across a land grown dry. My knuckles are swollen, stiff from years of kneading dough, scrubbing floors, carrying water, and holding the fragile weight of children and promises. Sometimes I stare at my hands as if they were separate creatures, 2 faithful companions that walked beside me all my life and now rest, weary, beside me. They remember things I try to forget. They remember the warmth of fevered skin cooled with cloth, the sting of cuts from broken glass, the ache of lifting pots too heavy for a small frame, the softness of a newborn cheek against the palm. Every wrinkle, every scar, every callus is a story. My hands are a library, and I, the old librarian, can no longer read every page, but I feel them, like braille pressed deep into my skin. My eyes drift to the window. They are tired, yes, but not unkind. They blur the edges of this foreign city, softening its strangeness into something bearable. Perhaps that is their gift after all these years, to take sharpness and turn it into mercy. These eyes have seen too much fire that devoured homes, floods that swallowed fields, faces vanishing under illness, doors closing where love once lived. And yet, they still search for light. Always, even in ruins, my eyes find something worth resting on, a shaft of sunlight on broken wood, the curl of steam from tea, a child's laughter rising above hunger. If you looked into my eyes now, you would not only see their wariness, you would see every season I carried. Summers of sweat and dust, monsoons of mud and resilience, winters of shawls too thin but hearts still beating. My gaze carries all of it, folded neatly into lines that crinkle at the corners. And my voice, my voice no longer hurries. Once, when I was young, my words tumbled like marbles, quick and bright, clattering against each other in laughter or anger. But years have pressed gravel into my throat. Now, when I speak, my words come slowly, carefully, like drops of water from an old tap. Each carries weight. Each knows it might be the last. My voice has hosted pain, but it has learned patience. When I speak now, it is not to command or to complain, it is to confess. Tonight, the silence demands confession. It is not an empty silence. No, it has a body. It presses against the walls and leans into my shoulders, insisting that I speak. Silence can be a friend when you are young. It lets you dream, lets you listen. But in old age, silence becomes something heavier. It questions you. It reminds you of absences. It asks you to remember what you tried to bury. And so I begin. I am in a country that does not know me. Its streets are strange. Its air sharp with a cold I have never befriended. Even the sky tilts differently here, as though the sun itself has learned new angles to keep its distance from me. Outside, people walk briskly, their shoes tapping against pavements with a rhythm that does not belong to me. Their voices rise and fall in a language that rolls roughly against my ears. I do not understand the words, but I understand the music of it, the haste, the indifference, the forward pull of people who have no time for stragglers. In this room, against the far wall, rests my suitcase. Its wheels, once noisy and eager, now stand still like tired animals. It waits, though I no longer know what for. Its handle leans forward as though it wants to be pulled, but my hands have no strength left to drag it anywhere. Against my pillow lies my passport, hidden beneath the cover as if it were a charm. I touch it each night, running my fingers along its corners, wearing down its edges until it feels soft, almost cloth-like. It is paper, yes, but it has become more than that. It has become a fragile proof that I am someone, that I come from somewhere, that I belong. The clock on the wall ticks cheerfully, too cheerfully. Its hands slice the minutes with a mechanical innocence, as though time were still gentle, obedient. But I know better. Time is not kind. Time steals with both hands, without apology. It took my youth when I wasn't looking. It took faces I thought I would never forget. It took laughter from rooms, leaving echoes in their place. And yet, Hear the clock ticks, foolish as a child playing in a graveyard. I was left here. Those words bruise even in a whisper. Left, as one leaves a shawl on a chair, believing the cold will never return. Left, as one forgets a basket of fruit, certain there will always be another harvest. Left, as one closes a door without checking who remains behind. It happened in a place of glass and echoes. Announcements rose and fell like voices from the heavens, calling out names of cities I could not pronounce. The floor shone so bright it erased my shadow, as if even the ground beneath me refused to hold me. I carried trust in my chest that day, but trust is glass. It cracked without a sound. By the time I noticed, I was already bleeding. But that is not today's story. That is for another chapter. Today's story is not about airports or doors that closed. Today is about me. About the woman who sits here with her hands like maps, her eyes softened by mercy, her voice roughened by years, and a silence that will not let her rest until she speaks. I was not always this old. Once, I was a girl with feet tough as bark, running across muddy fields. The world then was all doors, wooden, iron, bamboo, doors that creaked, slammed, stuck in the rains, or swung freely in summer winds. Behind every door was a story. Behind every story, a lesson. When the monsoon came, the river swelled and spilled into the village road, turning it into a silver ribbon that gleamed under stormy skies. I ran barefoot through it, water splashing against my ankles, the mud clinging lovingly to my heels. The rain fell like applause from the heavens, drenching me until even my bones felt washed clean. I did not know loneliness then. I did not know abandonment. I only knew that the sky had endless water, and that I was small and alive beneath it. At dusk, my mother would send me to the hand pump for water. The path there was alive, crickets singing, birds calling, fields whispering in their green tongues. I gripped the iron handle and pushed it down, listening to its groan, feeling its rhythm match my heartbeat. Water would gush, cool and clear, filling the pot I balanced against my hip. The pot left a dark wet circle across my dress, a proud mark of my work. Sometimes I dreamed of carrying home the whole river, storing it in clay jars for days when we were thirsty for more than tea. Food was our prayer. Scarce, yes, but never empty. Hunger was a teacher, and I was its dutiful student. I learned early that a meal tastes best when your arms ache from preparing it. I kneaded dough until my muscles burned, rolled it into thin rounds, placed them on a stove that hissed and smoked like a moody old man. Oil sizzled, cumin seeds jumped, onions turned golden, and the scent rose to the rafters, comforting us even before we ate. Scarcity is not emptiness. A little can be enough, if it is stirred with love. Love itself came quietly into my life. Not like thunder, not like lightning, but like the postman who arrives every day, familiar, steady. A glance across a courtyard. A shawl pressed into my hands in winter. A voice that said my name as though it were a secret song. Ours was not a love that burned brightly, it was a love that endured, like embers that glow long after the fire has dimmed. And then came loss. Loss is not a thief, it is an accountant. It came with its ledger, page after page, showing me what had been taken. Crops swallowed by floods. Men who left for work and returned hollow-eyed. Fever that swept through homes and left silence in its place. Each year, another entry in the book of sorrow. Yet even as loss sat at our table, chewing the bread we tried to save, I discovered something: we are never truly empty. We are only rearranged. There is a scar on my palm, still visible if I hold it to the lamp. It came from a broken jar of spices, shards glittering across the floor. I pressed the wound to my lips, tasted iron, and realized something I never forgot: life divides itself in an instant, into before and after. That was the first time I knew how fragile everything is. Work carried me through. Always, busy hands make a quiet heart. I mended clothes, stitched torn seams, patched not just fabric but also lives. Courage was never grand, it was small. Courage looked like serving rice without counting mouths. Courage looked like waiting by the door long after footsteps should have come. Courage looked like telling a child a story while my own heart shook inside me. I have always been brave in silence. And so here I am again, in silence, in a room that keeps its lamp burning for me, in a city that does not know my name. I was left here, yes. I was unchosen, yes. But I am not erased. The curtain breathes, the clock ticks, the lamp holds its circle of light, and I hold my story. The river was always our mirror. Before it grew wild, before it rose with anger and claimed what was not its own, it was gentle. A silver ribbon stretched across the belly of the land. At dawn, it shimmered pale and shy, carrying the first light of the sun, as though it had been chosen to deliver the morning itself. At night, it cradled the moon, breaking her face into 1,000 ripples, teaching me that beauty can survive even when it is broken. I was a girl then, small and restless, my hair tangled from the wind, my feet hardened from running barefoot. I spent hours by the water's edge, tracing patterns in the wet sand with a stick, listening to the river breathe. It had many voices, a quiet murmur when the air was still, a soft chuckle when stones tickled its belly, a deep hum when the wind leaned close. Sometimes I thought it was speaking to me alone. The earth around it was alive. Fields bent low, heavy with grain. Trees leaned toward the water, their roots drinking what their branches could not. Dragonflies darted like flying jewels, their wings flashing blue and green in the sun. Buffalo waded slowly into the current, their dark bodies rising from the mist like ancient spirits. Even the air smelled different near the river, damp, fertile, carrying the perfume of wet grass and clay. I remember how the world felt wide then. My days were marked not by clocks but by light, the pale wash of morning, the golden fire of afternoon, the violet hush of dusk. I followed the sun the way a moth follows flame, chasing its warmth across fields, pausing only when hunger tugged at my stomach. Food was never abundant, but it was sacred. A single piece of flatbread, a handful of lentils, a cup of water drawn cool from the pump. Each was a blessing counted aloud. Evenings were a kind of theater. The sky would spread its colors, orange, crimson, indigo, like a sari flung wide. Smoke rose from cooking fires, curling into shapes that teased my imagination. Children's laughter rang out from courtyards, mingling with the distant call of a flute or the rhythmic thump of a drum. And there I was, a child too, though already burdened with chores, already tasting the sharp salt of responsibility on my tongue. It was at the river that I first learned silence. Not the heavy, aching silence of old age, but a fertile silence, a silence that filled me instead of emptying me. I would sit on the bank with my chin resting on my knees, watching the water carry away fallen leaves, twigs, petals. The river never held on to what it carried. That was its secret. It knew the art of letting go. But not everything could be let go. The first time the river rose, I was no longer a child, but not yet a woman. The rains came heavier that year, falling without pause, beating the earth until it softened into mud. At first we laughed, we children of the fields. We splashed in puddles, raised our faces to the sky, drank the rain as though it were nectar sent down only for us. But laughter is fragile. It breaks quickly under the weight of hunger. The river swelled, its voice deepening, losing its gentleness. It grew restless, slapping its banks, dragging branches and debris in its current. We watched with wide eyes as the water rose higher, licking at the edges of the fields, swallowing the path where we once ran barefoot. The grown-ups muttered words we did not understand: fear, loss, prayer. That night, I woke to the sound of rushing. It was not rain. It was the river itself, roaring, tearing at its boundaries. The smell of wet earth filled the air, thick and suffocating. I stepped outside, the ground cold against my feet, and saw the water spreading like a shadow across the land. The moon floated above it, broken into trembling shards. I remember clutching my hands together, whispering to no one, "Stay, please stay where you belong." But rivers do not obey. By morning, the fields lay drowned. Crops bowed their heads under the weight of the flood. Trees stood half buried, their leaves trembling in the current. Homes sagged, their mud walls melting into the water. The air was heavy with smoke and grief. People gathered in silence, their faces drawn, their voices low. Some cried openly, their tears indistinguishable from the rain still falling. That was the day I first understood loss. Not through death, not through abandonment, but through the quiet theft of the land beneath our feet. The river that once carried my secrets had turned into something else entirely. An unwelcome guest, who had entered without knocking, who sat at our table and consumed everything, leaving us hungry and afraid. And yet, when the water finally receded, leaving behind a landscape scarred and muddy, something in me had changed. I had seen how quickly life could be undone, how laughter could turn to silence, how abundance could vanish overnight. From then on, I carried an invisible jar within me, a jar in which I stored small joys, a ripe mango, the coolness of shade, the sound of my mother humming as she cooked. I learned to keep them safe, like seeds against another storm. Because the river had taught me the truth: nothing stays. Not fields, not homes, not even rivers themselves. But memory can stay. And so, even now, in this foreign room with its single window and trembling lamp, I close my eyes and hear the river's many voices. I see the dragonflies, the buffalo, the moon breaking on the current. I am that barefoot girl again, drawing patterns in wet sand, listening to the water breathe. Before the river rose, I was innocent. After, I began to grow old, even as a child. My hands were never allowed to remain small. Even when my body was still a child's, my palms carried the shape of work. They were not made soft by toys or play. They were roughened by clay, water, fire. They learned early how to stretch, grip, hold, knead, lift. I remember the first time I tried to knead dough. My arms were thin, my wrists fragile. The flour dusted the air like smoke, coating my lashes, making me sneeze. The dough stuck stubbornly to my fingers, clinging like a child that refuses to be left alone. I pressed and pressed, my small fists sinking into the soft mass, the wooden board creaking beneath the effort. My shoulders ached, my elbows trembled, but when at last the dough yielded, when it grew smooth and pliant beneath my touch, I felt a triumph I could not name. It was the triumph of becoming useful. The fire in the stove was another teacher. It hissed when I fed it twigs. It crackled when I gave it straw. Its heat kissed my cheeks until they glowed red. Its smoke burned my throat, my eyes watering as though I wept. But I did not weep. I learned to squint through the haze, to press the flatbread onto the hot iron pan, to wait for the bubbles to rise like tiny breaths. The bread puffed, browned, and filled the air with a fragrance that felt larger than hunger itself. When I placed it on the plate, warm and steaming, I felt as though I had created not just food, but comfort. Water was heavier than I imagined. The clay pot dug into my hip as I carried it from the pump, sloshing with each step, its cool wetness seeping through my dress. My fingers gripped its rim tightly, my knuckles whitening with the strain. Sometimes I stumbled, sometimes I spilled, but I always returned for more. My small hands grew calloused, their softness replaced with strength. And clothes, oh, the endless stream of clothes, drenched at the riverbank, beaten against rocks, wrung until the water ran clear. My fingers cracked in the cold, my nails tore, my wrists ached. But the clothes shone white in the sun, flapping on lines like surrendered flags. I was not alone in this life, but I was often the smallest, and the smallest hands are the easiest to overlook. Small hands slip into narrow places. Small hands are sent to fetch what others drop. Small hands are trusted to serve, to carry, to be busy. No one sees how heavy a task feels when you are small. Yet sometimes, in secret, I looked at my hands and wondered, are these the hands of a child? Or have I already become old without knowing it? At night, when all the work was done, I would curl into my mat and stare at the roof, its wooden beams crisscrossing above like the ribs of a giant resting creature. My hands tingled with tiredness, but they also hummed with memory. The roughness of dough, the sting of fire, the weight of water, the sharpness of soap. Even in sleep, my fingers twitched, still kneading, still carrying, still wringing. But my hands were not only workers, they were also dreamers. When no one watched, I would trace shapes in the dirt, flowers, suns, stars, stories only I could read. I dipped them in the river and imagined they could paint its surface with color. I cupped fireflies in my palms, watching them glow like stolen stars before setting them free. I pressed my hands against my chest, feeling the stubborn rhythm of my heart, as if to remind myself I am alive. I am more than my work. And yet, the world measured me not by my laughter, not by my dreams, but by the weight my hands could carry. So I carried water, I carried food, I carried clothes, I carried silence, I carried secrets, and slowly, without realizing, I began to carry life itself. The lamp beside me breathes like a careful creature, its light the size of a cupped hand. Even now, after so many years, a small flame can summon old rooms and older seasons. Smoke is patient, it lodges in memory the way it settles in cloth, quietly, stubbornly, refusing to leave even when the window is thrown wide. If I lift my sleeve to my face, I swear I can still find a ghost of it. The faint bitter, sweet of singed oil and wood, the same scent that once wove itself into my hair, my shawl, the lines of my hands. I learned the grammar of fire before I learned the grammar of letters. It spoke in pops and hisses, in long sighs and sudden flares. And if you listened closely enough, you could hear its moods. There was the steady, obedient flame for tea, the robust, cheerful blaze for bread, the sullen, smoky temper that warned of damp wood and impatience. Fire had its own etiquette: feed it too quickly, and it sulked. Starve it, and it punished you with smoke that stung your eyes and watered your pride. The matchstick, thin as a bone, was a magic wand that worked only if your hands did not tremble. I struck it with care, shielded its brief flower from the wind with my palm, and led that flicker to the waiting stove, as if escorting a guest to her chair. The kitchen was my first theater. Light and shadow danced across blackened pots. The iron pan held a disk of heat that you could almost see, a trembling shimmer that lifted bread into balloons. Duff answered to the heel of my hand, onions obeyed the knife's simple logic, turmeric stained the air the color of afternoon. I learned to keep a damp cloth ready, a lid within reach, an ear tuned to the pitch of the boil. A good cook, I decided, was really a listener. But fire is a poor judge of walls. The dry season came with a crackle underfoot. Grass snapped when you stepped on it, thatch whispered warnings. The sky grew thin, the sun hard and without tenderness. That afternoon the breeze felt restless, tugging at edges, lifting corners. I remember the sound first. Not a roar but a questioning, like paper being crumpled in another room. Then the air shifted, and everything began to taste of heat. Flame travels the way rumor does, hungry for anything that will carry it further. A single ember rose, a bright insect, landing where it had no business to be. In an instant the quiet thatch above learned a new language. The roof spoke in tongues of orange and blue. Smoke uncoiled from the rafters the way a snake remembers its spine. I have been afraid in my life, but fright wears different faces. This was not the panic that scatters, it was a narrowing. The world pulled small and sharp. My hands, so used to measuring flour and water, measured seconds instead. The room answered me with its own quick arithmetic. What can be lifted? What must be left? What will burn fastest? What will save itself if I cannot? I took what I could carry in two hands. The small tin that held a lifetime of needles, a folded book of names, a scarf that was more memory than cloth. Everything else I looked at once, as if looking were a blessing I could leave behind. Outside, the wind became an accomplice. Sparks leapt like delighted children, landing where they pleased, making a game of our fear. Smoke thickened until the world was reduced to silhouettes, and sound the groan of wood giving up its stubbornness. The cough of ash clawing at the throat, the long thin note in the air that comes when heat eats everything it is offered. I learned quickly how low you must bend to find air, how the ground can be kinder than the sky, how a mouthful of the wrong breath can turn you backwards. I carried water until the bone of the handle wrote its alphabet into my palm. I learned the weight of a bucket when time is an enemy. Water is loud when it meets fire, louder than you expect, a kind of argument. It barks and spits and disappears in a fury that feels like betrayal. You can pour a whole river into a blaze and still feel poor. But the body insists on trying, the arm swings, the hand tips, the feet return for more, as if obedience might teach flame its limits. There is a particular moment in any burning when you understand what will be lost. Not everything, not nothing, something. The mind makes a list too quickly to read. It goes like this: roof, bedding, letters, the ceremonial things that only look like gods, but are really clay. The pots that kept us fed, the small objects that had no use but felt like anchors. You think you will weep, but your eyes have other work. When it was over, because everything ends, even fire, the silence came back limp and stunned. Ash fell in a soft, steady snow. The world had been erased, and then rewritten in charcoal. Where a room had been there was a scorch mark, where a wall had stood there was a shrug of smoke. Heat lingered the way anger does after the argument is done, not ready to leave, unwilling to admit defeat. I sat on my heels and let my breath count itself, 1, 2, 3, until numbers made the ground feel trustworthy again. A month is a long time when your mouth is full of a word you cannot swallow. I learned the streets by their smells. A bakery that wrapped the morning in warm air. A cafe that roasted bitterness until it smelled like adventure, A pharmacy, where the breath of menthol stood guard with folded arms. I learned the language by listening to how mothers scolded their children. A universal music, you can borrow it anywhere. I learned the posture of asking for help without appearing to ask for it. I learned, once again, how to make a small corner into a home. A needle, a thread, a cup where paperclips could start a family. But you see, I am not ready to speak of the after yet. Not fully. I am still laying the table for the story. I am setting down the plates of my older years, the bowls of my younger hunger, the spoon that has stirred grief until it forgot to be bitter. If you sit with me in this room long enough, I will tell you about the summer I almost drowned, and then learned to float not by fighting the water, but by trusting my own lungs. I will tell you about the winter I kept a plant alive with breath, and the warmth of my palms, because the sun refused us for 40 days. I will tell you about the night the sky broke into fire, and how even then there was a woman. Always, in every disaster, there is a woman who cooked rice as if this were not the end. Perhaps I was that woman. Perhaps I only learned from her. Perhaps it is enough to say that I am the sort of person who believes in rice. What I can say now is this: I have lived long enough to know that abandonment is not the opposite of love. It is the opposite of remembering. To abandon is to forget your own hands once knew the shape of someone else's hunger. I have not forgotten. Even here. Even in this room where the curtain breathes and the clock pretends to be a brave little soldier, I carry the names of those I fed like seeds in my mouth. I will not spit them out to be rid of them. I will keep them there, let the syllables soften, let them become something I can swallow without bleeding. Memory, if we keep it long enough, turns into bread. My eyes, tired and gentle, make mirrors of the window glass. I see myself as if I were across the street in another life, an old woman with her hair gathered at the nape like a handful of fog, a shawl slipping, a mouth stubborn about its dignity. I lift my hands, the rivers, the maps, the long conversation between bone and patience, and I turn them in the lamplight as if they were specimens. These hands have signed forms and wrapped wounds and taught dough the shape of mercy. They have waved goodbye more times than I have said I love you. They know how to open and how to hold. They know the weight of a head falling asleep on a lap, and the weight of a door that will not open because you have knocked too gently. If I close my eyes, I can return to the smell of lime on a courtyard wall, the feel of cotton dried in a sun so clean it made a sound when the wind passed through it. I can return to the hiss of a pressure cooker, and the way a television laughs, even when no one in the room does. I can return to the taste of winter oranges, their peels curling on the table like commas, promising a sentence that will continue. I can return to the first time I held a letter with my name on it, how the ink had the faint perfume of distance. I can return to the day I learned that some doors shut forever, and you must be brave enough to build a window. It is not a tragedy to be alone with your story. A story told to the right quiet can become a bridge. If you are listening, and I think you are, I think the room is leaning in, then you should know that I intend to cross. Not with hurry, not with anger. With the deliberate steps of someone who has learned that every crossing asks you to leave a little behind. I will take what I need, the names in my mouth like seeds, the needle, the thread, the small faith in boiling water and tea leaves. I will take the lessons I stitched into my skin. Scarcity is not emptiness. Loss rearranges. It does not erase. The world is always poised between before and after. Courage flickers, but it does not go out. The hour grows heavier. The lamp makes a small gold island, and I live on it without complaint. The curtain breathes. The clock goes on with its cheerful foolishness. I lay my right hand over my left as if they were two sisters who have decided to sit quietly together for once. In the halo of this little light, I let my voice break and then mend itself, a seam finished neatly at the edge, so it will not catch when the story moves. This is where I will begin again, with the sound of wheels on a floor bright enough to steal your reflection, with the click of a door that mistook an old woman for a shadow, with the first breath I counted after I found myself unchosen. A month later, I would learn to count differently. But that is another scene, another cut, another small, defiant light. For now, the room keeps the lamp, I keep the room, and my voice, patient with its own ache, promises to return tomorrow. and speak the next part as if time were not a bully but a road. And I, with my rivered hands and merciful eyes, were the kind of traveler who knows that every mile is also an inheritance. My hands have become my record keepers. These wrinkled palms are not merely skin stretched thin, they are ink-stained pages, each crease a number carried over, each scar an unbalanced sum. When I spread my fingers, I can almost see the items listed there: a doll that broke before its second year, a promise that never returned, a room that emptied itself in one season, the sound of a voice cut short. Everything is catalogued somewhere in the texture of my flesh. I once thought loss was a single blow, sharp and devastating, like the sudden strike of lightning. But I learned it is not like that at all. Loss is an auditor, persistent, methodical. It tallies in the background, even while you try to live. It makes entries quietly. The day you misplaced a ribbon you swore you would keep forever. The hour a familiar face passed into shadow. The moment you realized laughter in a certain key would never echo through your walls again. Each departure, no matter how small, entered my book. I did not write them willingly, they wrote themselves. I remember the first time I held an empty space as though it were an object. The bed was the same size, the walls the same height, the floor just as firm beneath me, but the absence lay heavier than the heaviest stone. I sat there, trying to adjust my breathing, as if my lungs had to learn a new arithmetic. In that moment I understood that loss does not simply take away. It leaves behind a counterweight of silence. And it is this weight one must learn to carry. And carry it I did. Like a ledger balanced against my chest, I bore the accounts through the years. Sometimes the columns leaned so far into deficit that I wondered how any life could remain. Yet somehow, there were always small credits tucked away. The warmth of a cup in my hands, the sudden mercy of shade, the way dawn still came even after a night that felt eternal. These entries did not erase the debts, but they gave me a margin, a space in which to keep going. I have grown into a woman who reads her life not as triumphs but as balances. What was taken against what was spared. I lost rooms, yet I kept walls. I lost voices, yet I kept the ability to hum. I lost many hands I once depended on, but mine still know how to move, how to cook, how to cradle. Survival itself became a form of interest, slow and steady, accumulating enough to pay for another day. Even abandonment, the sharpest line in my ledger, has its place in the book. It is written in bold, in ink that will never fade. But beside it, carefully, I have written what was left to me: breath, memory, the resilience that lives in marrow. That is my balancing act. That is how the accountant within me keeps the book from closing too soon. At times, I touch my chest as if to count. The steady pulse beneath my palm is a number that adds itself, minute after minute, insisting that life is still in session. Each beat says, one more entry, one more chance to mark both the deficit and the credit, one more day to open the pages, run my fingers across the wrinkles, and whisper to myself, yes, much was taken, but not everything. I am an old woman now, but I remain the keeper of this book. When my time comes, I imagine setting it gently on the table, its columns unfinished but honest. Let the universe audit me if it wishes, it will find no lie in my accounts. It will see the long record of losses, and the stubborn notes of endurance beside them. And perhaps it will notice what I already know. That the greatest wealth I possess is not what I saved, but what I learned in the keeping. The patience of an accountant who measures not only what is gone, but also what refuses to go. There is a sound to emptiness. Few know it, but I do. It is not silence. Silence has weight, like a heavy curtain drawn across a window. Emptiness, instead, is a whispering space, an echo that answers you even when you have said nothing. It is the creak of a chair that no one sits in, the soft groan of wood in a corridor where no footsteps fall. Empty rooms are fluent in a language most people refuse to learn, but I had no choice. When I was younger, I believed rooms belonged to the people who filled them. Laughter carved its initials into plaster. Arguments left their smoke on the ceiling. Joy and sorrow both had fingerprints that lingered in corners. But when the people go, when their breath is gone from the air, the rooms do not surrender these traces. Instead, they turn them into a vocabulary, one that speaks back only to those who remain. I have walked through rooms stripped bare, and felt them speak in tongues of dust and shadow. The bed without its sleeper becomes a question. The window without its watcher becomes a wound. Even the walls, once confidants of secrets whispered at night, begin to ache with muteness. The worst emptiness is not when a room is vacant, but when it remembers too much. I once stood in the middle of such a room, where the walls seemed to exhale memory. I reached out my hand and let my fingers brush the cold plaster, half expecting it to tremble at my touch. I whispered aloud, not to any person, but to the hollow space itself, and in that moment I realized emptiness answers. Not in words, but in echoes. The air bends your breath back to you, reshaped, reminding you that you are both speaker and listener now. The foreign country, where I sit today, is full of such rooms. They do not know my name, nor do they care. They were built for other lives, other tongues, other memories. I am only a shadow passing through their thresholds. But I have learned to make peace with their strangeness. I leave a shawl on a chair, a cup on a sill, a lamp on a small table, and slowly the room accepts me, learns my rhythm. It does not love me, but it tolerates me. And in that tolerance I find a fragile kind of belonging. Empty rooms have taught me humility. They remind me that everything we claim ownership of, beds, walls, windows, even air, is borrowed. We are only tenants of time. One day, the rooms I once filled with my voice and my steps will belong to silence again, waiting for another body, another set of footsteps to translate them anew. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the rooms of my past calling back. The kitchen that once steamed with bread. The small chamber, where the monsoon's drumming felt like a second heartbeat. The hallway where my hands brushed the walls to steady themselves in the dark. They are all gone now, but their language still lives in me. This, I think, is the secret of endurance, to learn the language of empty rooms, and not be afraid when they speak. For in their whispers, I no longer hear abandonment alone. I hear continuity. A room empties, but it does not end. It waits. It remembers. And in that remembering, it promises that even my absence will one day become its story.